You know, when we talk about the greatest films ever made, we almost always talk about the director, right? The genius, the visionary calling all the shots. But what if I told you that for a huge chunk of Hollywood's history, the real creative force wasn't the director at all? What if it was someone else, an invisible figure, pulling the strings from just behind the curtain? Let's figure out who was really in charge. So it all comes down to this one question. Who is the true author of a film? Now, we've all been taught to believe it's the director, the artist, the genius. But is that the whole story? Honestly, for a long, long time in Hollywood, the answer to that question was a hard no. On the one hand, you have the famous auteur theory, which says the director's unique vision is what makes a film a film. But if we jump back to Hollywood's golden age, we find a totally different reality, the studio system. And in that system, a movie wasn't some personal artistic statement. Nope, it was a product, manufactured with incredible care for quality and consistency. And the person in charge of that whole assembly line was the producer. All right, so let's peel back that curtain and finally meet this so-called invisible director, the person who is really shaping the entire look and feel of classic Hollywood. That's right. Long before directors were treated like rock stars, it was the producers who ran the show. And I don't just mean they managed the budget. No, they were the creative engine behind the whole machine. And there's one man, really, who basically invented this role as we know it.
His name was Irving Thalberg. People at MGM called him the Boy Wonder, and for good reason. He completely transformed what a producer did. He wasn't just a numbers guy, he was a full-on creative general, and he commanded every single piece of a film's creation, from the first word on the page to the final cut.
So how did he do it? Well, his method was built on 3 pillars of absolute control. First, the central producer system. This basically meant he had the final word on, well, everything. The script, who got cast, and most importantly, the final cut. Second was his retake philosophy, which was revolutionary. If an audience in a sneak preview didn't love a scene, he'd just reshoot it, and again, until they did. And third, script supremacy. For Thalberg, the script was everything. He had teams of writers polishing every line until it was perfect for the MGM brand. Now, you'd think a guy with this much power would want his name plastered all over everything, right? But Thalberg was famously quiet about it. He used to say, credit you give yourself is not worth having. He almost never took a producer credit on screen, preferring to be the man behind the curtain. But don't let that quote fool you. His influence was absolutely massive. I mean, at any given moment, Thalberg was personally supervising around 50 different movies, all in production at the same time. He was ensuring every single one of them fit his vision. It was filmmaking on an industrial scale. So, what do you get when one person has that much creative control? Well, you get something totally new. He wasn't just making movies one by one, he was engineering a brand. He was creating what we now call the studio look. The studio look was, for all intents and purposes, a brand identity. It's like how you can instantly recognize a certain brand of car just by its shape. Back then, audiences could walk into a theater and know, just within minutes, oh, this is an MGM picture, or this is definitely Warner Bros., just based on its signature style. And the differences were night and day. Under Thalberg, MGM was all about being grand and aspirational. It had this beautiful, pearly, high-key lighting and these unbelievably huge sets. Now compare that to Warner Bros., which was known for being gritty, fast-paced, telling stories about working-class people. Or look at Paramount, which felt more witty, sophisticated, almost European in its style. Each one had its own distinct flavor. And Thalberg's MGM brand was pure aspiration. The lighting was designed to make stars like Greta Garbo and Clark Gable look like actual gods. The sets, designed by the genius Cedric Gibbons, were dripping with opulence. Even the stories felt more sophisticated, more literate. Everything about an MGM movie was designed to feel prestigious, to feel bigger than life. Now, that old studio system eventually died out. But Thalberg's big idea, the idea of a single creative architect guiding everything, it didn't go away. In fact, you could argue it's come roaring back. You can really trace the whole thing. Back in the 30s, you have Thalberg perfecting this producer as architect system. Then, by the 70s, that system crumbles, and suddenly the director is king. Think of guys like Francis Ford Coppola or Martin Scorsese. But now we're in the era of huge, sprawling cinematic universes. And guess who's back in charge? The producer architect. And this is where it all just clicks. Think about it. Back then, you had Irving Thalberg creating the unified studio look for MGM. Today, you have someone like Kevin Feige doing the exact same thing for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're both the chief architects, making sure that dozens of films, made by dozens of different directors, all feel like they belong in the same world. It's Thalberg's playbook, just for a new generation. So, here's a thought for you. The next time you sit down to watch a big blockbuster, try to look past the director's name for a second. Look for the architect, the producer who's quietly building the whole universe. And just ask yourself, does knowing they're there change the way you see the movie?